a 7-day water fast. So all you could have was water for the 7 days?
Yeah, and a pinch of salt. And a
Pinch of
pinch of
salt.
salt in case the electrolytes got really low. So they say if you feel like lethargic, to add a little bit of salt to balance your electrolyte and water levels.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was a 7-day water only fast with a church that I've been tuning into. And I learned a lot about the body. So after this, so the first 3 days you have like hunger pains because your body's like, you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to eat.
Right.
And then after that, the hunger pains kind of stop because your body goes into ketosis and starts burning off like the fat in your body. Yeah.
What? Okay. Okay.
So people report like feeling really clear starting around day
That
4.
fast? Interesting. Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's day 4, you start to get that clarity. Ketosis is the term that you use, right?
Ketosis. Yeah. I hope there's no one checking for me from a medical perspective, but yeah, ketosis.
If we've reached the medical audience with this podcast, I mean, I've unlocked something really special here.
Yeah, it's like days 1 through 3, your body's burning sugar, it's in stored energy, so glycolysis or something like that, and then you go into ketosis when your stores of sugar run out.
Wow. Well, so this practice to me sounds like the ultimate in what wellness practitioners would say the mind-body connection. Am I oversimplifying that? Undersimplifying it? What? Walk me through it.
Oh, it's really interesting. I've talked about how my faith is Christian. I also, at one point, I now say that I'm a retired yoga instructor, but I got certified in yoga. And so during that time, I was making all of these connections in like the Christian world and then in, I guess what you could say, Eastern medicine, essentially. And so I do believe that it's all connected in some interesting way. From a spiritual perspective, the Bible talks a lot about fasting as a way to get closer to God, dying to your flesh and receiving more from the spirit. And so that was essentially the journey that I was going on. And I think as a part of that, your body naturally is like, okay, I guess this is a restart.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, is it too early for me to ask you, with this restart, any renewed sense of clarity or renewed sense of connection to, is it a mantra? Is it a collective being? I'll leave it open-ended to you on that.
Yeah, no, I would say it's not too soon. And I left my prayer journal upstairs, but I would say that last year, 2024, was a really challenging year for me, like spiritually, emotionally, physically, like not being in the places that I wanted to be. And I just felt far from God and also far from church community because there was also like a church scandal that was involved. And so I felt like in this fast, I felt connected, not just to God again, but to community because there was thousands of people, whether they attend the church physically or digitally, that were also taking part in this fast. And one of the things that I got out of it was a renewed passion in praying for others. So praying for those that I love and hold dear, but also praying for our country. And with the new president and the election and everything that's going on and all of the division, just having a God view, which means I hopefully don't get so sucked up in like the comings and goings of my own emotions and other people's emotions, and can just pray for like peace and joy and love on a grander scale. So I would say it kind of like opened my heart up a bit, and maybe in a sense like helped me be a little less selfish and also be a little more open to whatever God has for me. I feel like in 2024, I was holding on to this plan that I had for myself and my future, and it didn't work out, which is rare that I have a plan, a very good plan. And there's all these external factors that are like, no, 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 no. And so in 2025, I'm like, okay, we're going in the way of flow and ease and whatever it is that God has for me. So I think that was a long answer to your question, but hopefully I answered it.
It's so beautiful. Well, a couple of things that stood out to me as you were talking about this 7-day journey you've been on, which feels like it's the culmination of many, many years, not just 7 days worth of the journey that you've been on. But what stood out to me was this concept of connection to others, connection to community, as you said, as a way for deepening and strengthening your connection to yourself. And this ongoing cycle of community to self, which is such a beautiful way to talk about, I think, the apex of where many of us are. And you can call it a spiritual awakening. You could call it a global realization that we are starting to sever the ties of a global community who's in the pursuit of creating better society for all to exist in, not just for the single entity to exist in, which I think is really beautiful. A lot of, I'm hearing this frequently, that a lot of folks are coming back into what I'm calling like that great recentering, where they're starting to realize, what are my priorities? What are my values? What do I stand for? And yeah, I mean, what an exciting spot to be in for you. I'm excited. I'm having like a secondhand like high of rejuvenation, of excitement, of enthusiasm.
God flow.
You're where you're in. God flow. Yeah. Well, we should tell folks about God flow.
Well, how do we
this
start?
like definition. Yeah. Well, you go first. You recount how we got to this concept of God flow together.
Well, yeah. So I remember from our previous conversation, I mean, it just comes up. My faith just naturally comes up. And I was telling you about my book, Beyond How Are You, and how it just felt like it was a God thing. Like the process of it was really, I guess, easy for me, or it flowed. So it's kind of the ease that I'm seeking for this year. And you were talking about your process in your book and just in your career and your journey, and how you had described it as flow. And we kind of merged those two together as God flow, which felt really like natural for us. So that was my interpretation.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I remember as well, too. And it's interesting. One of the things that I want to live in pursuit of is, while organized religion and the concept of God, however specific or abstract you want to be with that concept, is just an interesting journey, exploration for me growing up in a very conservative religious household. And while I do have lots of touches to spirituality, one of the things that I constantly ground myself with, and what it sounds like you do, is, well, I mean, you dropped the word ketosis in our opening conversation, but it sounds like you balance, the spiritual and the religious side of who you are, and substantiate it with science, with facts, with, very binary aspects of how the world works. And the state of God flow is, I think, our balancing of this like spiritual, this abstract things that we can't really explain, but grounding it with the science of flow state, right? That perfect apex of where your skill and the challenge are met, and you're just in that, like, I don't know, you call it the runner's high, or, in sports my whole life, like that status of when like things are just perfectly in that sweet spot, and you're just like, you're just flowing. So yeah, so God flow. Borrow it. Have fun with it, everybody.
I think yes, to runner's high, because that, oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful thing. I'd also say I think I think in the search, I mean, I can't speak for other people, but in our search, like in the search of knowledge, I think there's always a coming up against a wall that reminds us of our humanity. And kind of the word that's coming up for me is surrender. There's this bit of like seeking, and then there's also this bit of surrendering to our humanity, and just the fact that like we're just humans, and that's okay, and like being okay with that. I can go into this whole like, I think sometimes it's easy to elevate ourselves as God, but then that comes with like all of this pressure that a human can't handle. And I can go on for days talking about all different topics. So keep me focused.
Well, and so watch me as I try to land this plane. But what I think you're referring to is the ego, right? So there's the connection to the self, and then there's the prioritization of the self, because your ego is motivating you to prioritize the self rather than the collective. And we buried the headline previously about your book, and the concept of your book, I think, helps to bring a very specific set of actions for folks who find themselves in the process of letting go of the ego, reconnecting to themselves, but more importantly, reconnecting to others so that they can then connect to themselves. And so I want to talk more about your book. Let's dive in there.
I just learned how to land a plane from you. Like, that was beautiful.
What?
That was beautiful.
I was like, you just fasted for 7 days and then also casually got a pilot's license?
The metaphorical plane.
Okay, great.
That was good. Like, you tied it all together wonderfully.
Thank you.
Yes, the name of my book, and I always have it with me, this little pocket book, is Beyond How Are You? Mastering the Art of Meaningful Greetings. The concept of the book, like you mentioned, is all about how we connect with others beyond that question that everyone asks, how are you? And the idea is that how are you is a habit, and we're trying to help people break that habit. And part of that is just being intentional. So when you ask the question, why are you asking? Are you asking it just as an extension of why, or are you asking because you really want to know? But in that, like, do you really have time to hear what that person's answer is? Do you really have a relationship where you can hold space for that person and hear how they're doing? And then when someone asks you, like, are you comfortable? Like, sometimes it's okay when someone asks, how are you? For you to be like, oh, actually, I either don't know, or I'm not that great, but I don't really want to talk about right now. And it's also a form of boundary setting and upholding those boundaries. And like, people ask me all the time, like, why this specific question? And for me, it was because I was getting asked at a time in my life where it felt like a very overwhelming question, but also like a question that wasn't deep enough. And so it's something that's simple, but can be really complex. And I'm hoping that as people read, because it's full of like alternative questions to ask and like tips for upholding the boundaries, that people start to break that habit, and also start to, in breaking the habit, start creating more deeper, meaningful connections in their lives.
I love this. So in essence, as we go through the motions, right, the etiquette of navigating society, that question, how are you, is one that we're in some senses obligated to ask. And with that obligation, we've diffused this obligation to actually listen. You can hear what someone says, but are you actually listening to what they're saying? Mm-hmm. And when you're being presented with the opportunity to express your most authentic self and reply to how are you, we are all on autopilot, right? Because either one, we're in a state of vulnerability and we don't actually want to access that depth and that connection to others, or two, we know the tropes of social greetings, and so we know that this is just a formality, that someone's just asking how are you because that's the social gestures that we've become accustomed to. And I have to imagine this is coming for you after a realization moment, when you recognize that that sentence, or question rather, how are you, was being underused in our ability to connect with one another. Is there an origin story about how you started examining that question?
Yeah, there is an origin story. And I will say, because you mentioned this, like in our day-to-day, the common responses to the question are good, fine, tired, okay, or busy. Like, those are the 4 or 5 common responses that everyone gives. And I'm like, totally. Man, if those are the 5 lives that we're like living on rotation all the time, like, life isn't as exciting as we think it is, like, especially on social media, right? But no, oh gosh, what year was this? This was in 2023. I love learning. I think we both talked about our love for learning, and I'd come across this program in positive psychology by the Flourishing Center. And I was like, do I want to sign up for this or not? And I decided I wanted to sign up for it. There were some hurdles along the way, like the card that I had planned to use. There was like a credit card. Someone had gotten access to my credit card, and so there was a delay in me signing up for the course. Anyway, I ended up signing up for the course. I chose the 6 a.m. time slot because I knew that Well, there's a few. I knew that like my day-to-day job could get in the way during the lunch hour. I
Hmm.
also knew that I was more of a morning person than a nighttime person. And I wanted to have a global cohort. So I was like 6 a.m. I will get some people from Asia, Europe. And that's what happened. So anyway, I had this course. I had this, my first class. And then it was still early up in the morning for me to call one of my best friends at the time and like tell her about the class. And I remember thinking about like, we were talking about like streams of income, and I'm gonna sit that there for a second. I get an email like an hour later for a 15-minute conversation, and I get on the call with this managing director of the company I was at, and it turns out I'm being laid off after almost 8 years of this company that I had loved, that I had made a lot of connections within, that had really propelled my career, that I had just had a great time at. And then, so I'm in this interesting place of I've got 9 months in this course where I'm learning about the study of human flourishing and positive psychology. I'm like, okay, this is the first time in almost 10 years that I have an opportunity to just explore. So I took stained glass making classes and like all different types of things. So it's like this exciting period of time, but I'm also like, okay, my hobbies aren't cheap and I have to make a living, and it's harder to get clients on my own than it is working for a large global company.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of mixed emotions, right? Anyway, my best friend calls me and she asks me how I'm doing, and I honestly share with her. And the way she responds, it actually hurts my feelings because she didn't mean to hurt my feelings, but she said something that I don't want to say it was a blanket statement. It was a common Christian thing to say, basically to say like, we'll just pray. Like it was kind of like like challenging me in a faith area. But at the time, it did not feel helpful. And so I wanted to get off the call. Like I literally, MK was like, I'm kind of done inside. I hadn't said anything yet, but I'm assuming I'm going to give this best friend credit, that she recognized something because we were on FaceTime. And so she asked me a different question, and she asked me, had I cooked anything recently that I was really excited about? And I had made oxtails for the first time. And for those that are listening, making oxtail is not a small feat. Like it was a 3-day process for me.
Even for
I
accomplished chefs, oxtails, like there's a reason it's not found on menus very often.
Well, now that I've done it, I will tell anybody, just pay the money to have somebody else do it. Like,
No.
but I made them. I was really proud of myself. They were delicious, and I had not shared it with anyone. I hadn't posted it online. I hadn't told a soul. And her asking me that question, like I lit up. I think I lit up just now, actually talking about
You did.
it.
You did.
I lit up, and it changed the entire trajectory of our conversation. And from that moment, I was like, okay, I'm in this course. We have a capstone project. This is what I'm going to do. I had been carrying around 2 pocketbooks, one on words and one on faith. And I was like, this is what I want to do, because I know people have short attention span, and I know people like always have an excuse of like leaving a book at home. Well, this one you can just slide in your pocket. It's really convenient. And so I was like, I'm going to model this approach for my book.
Amazing. Well, what also stands out as really amazing to me too is that your friend, in the process of being close enough to you, could understand and read your body language and recognize that there was a layer deeper that they needed to go in order to access a certain sense of authenticity in you. And so often, and that's one of your best friends, right? Like, and so often in our experiences in the professional sense, we can see those moments, we can sense those moments, we can feel those moments, and we don't go that click deeper with folks. And I'm curious, in your journey, in the work that you're doing, how you're finding navigating this with folks who are used to that distance, that separation, and not putting themselves that one step closer to the person that they're interacting with.
Oh, that's a good one. A really good observation and really good question. I would say there are a few things that people can do. One is lean into being a curious person in general. Like, being a naturally curious person will get you so far in this life because people love when you ask them questions about themselves. And that's a blanket statement because sometimes like questions can feel a little bit intimidating or overreaching.
Mhm.
But if you just observe people and see like what lights them up or even like what kind of brings them down a notch a little bit, and if you inquire about it, you can open up so much in that person's world and also in your own world. So that would be my first thing, like leading with curiosity. My second would be to take notes. Like if you don't have the greatest memory, like jot down a note of what someone has said to you and then ask about it later. I mean, I guess that still ties back to the curiosity, but it's taking an action step to really be thoughtful. And the word intentional is going to come up again. Intentional and show care, which might be the third thing, is like having this natural care for people and your like care for your brother, or I guess brotherly or sisterly love, and coming back to that full sense of like connection and humanity. So those would be like one, intangible, and two, I don't want to call it spiritual, but two, like greater sense of purpose and reasons for being to connect with other people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason why in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, connection with one another is a vital part of our ability to stay alive. And not, and like hard stop, like stay alive, not flourish, right? Not continue to grow and find the expansiveness of our potential, of our possibility, but just to survive.
Mhm.
And when you start to understand how to tap into a connection as a way to deepen your connection to yourself, to deepen your understanding of how the world works, to deepen your understanding of selflessness, to your point, curiosity and intentionality, a whole new world, a whole new dimension opens up for how you see the world and how you show up and navigate in this world. And your book is like what I just love. Your book is, it's so simple. It's just one question and reorienting yourself to asking that question and answering that question. And it doesn't have to be any more complicated than that.
It doesn't. It doesn't. Thank you, MK. There's one thing that you said about, we brought up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there was this bit about safety. One thing I did want to add is being a good listener, because if you're a good listener, then people are going to tell you who they are. And everyone's heard that quote, like people will tell you and show you who they are. And then you can then ask your questions based off of what someone has already said. Because what someone has already shared with you is what they're already safe sharing. So it's like you've got your foot in the door. And it also like takes a little bit of the effort from you to like think of like some creative way. If you don't have a book yet, right? You can just listen to someone, be curious, and then ask a question, and it just grows and it creates it creates right intimacy because it's based on a foundation of trust. There are ways that you can ask questions that make people feel really uncomfortable because there hasn't been that foundational layer of trust. And so I just wanted to throw that in there.
I love that. Well, in the previous episode, we talked about this word intimacy, which is, especially in the business context, like a no-no, right? Like there are so many preconceived notions of what intimacy means, but in the most basic sense, intimacy underpins this aspect of vulnerability and intentionality, and in the expression of just asking someone how you are, and to your point, genuinely listening, not just hearing what someone's saying, but listening to what someone is saying. You've introduced an aspect of intimacy that builds the connection that you're trying to we're all seeking to one another, and then of course in turn to ourselves. It's just one question. I'm still like, it's just one question, but it's so powerful, it's so potent.
And you know what's interesting? I would argue that asking how are you is actually a very unsafe question, especially in our American society, when we focus so much more on human doing than human being. because the number of people that don't actually know how they are would surprise you. Like the amount I journal twice a day, once in the morning and once at night. And like when I don't, I'm like kind of all over the place. And I say that to say, like, to me, it takes a lot of like work to know how you're doing, like just in general. And so when we ask someone how they're doing and either they haven't done the work or like you don't have the capacity to hold how they're actually doing, we're actually like perpetuating the cycle of the habit of someone saying, how are you? Good, fine, tired, or busy. How are you? Good, fine, tired, or busy, so that we can just get past it. Like most people are just trying to get past that question to something else. And so one more thing I'll share. I even like in the book.
You share all the things for the record. You have so much.
I'm like, you can say hi and actually not ask a question at all. You can say hi. And sometimes my favorite thing to say is, it's good to see you, because you acknowledge the person's presence and acknowledge like that it is good to see someone. And oftentimes that will get a response. They might just ask, how are you? To me instead, but like I feel comfortable handling that question. So yeah, I just want to say, like, if you're struggling to think of another question, you don't have the book, it's okay to just say something, because saying something can also disarm the other person.
I love it. Okay, so there's so much that I like. My brain is going to be like, there's so many things I want to double click on with you. Okay, so the first thing I want to acknowledge is that phrase you use called human doing versus human being. Right there, if you're not already writing a sequel, that's got to be your sequel. I'm not sure if that book title exists, but I'm squatting that domain for you. Human doing versus human being. Let's talk about that for a second. Tell me more about it.
Well, we live in a capitalist society, and in order to make money, you generally have to do things, right? But I found that the people that have amassed great amounts of wealth have really honed in on their purpose and really connected with their sense of being. So why is it that I exist? Why do I do what I do? Kind of understanding that ikigai. I think I finally said that right. Maybe it's the first time.
Yeah, you got it. You nailed it.
Yeah. So like, what am I good at? What does the world need? Like that whole purpose piece. The doing is like essentially the easier part, because it's easy to think that you're like, what you do is who you are, but it's kind of backwards. It's like, who are you created to be in this life? The hard part about that question though is like, it's not an overnight thing. Like it's a culmination, and it also evolves. And if you're not aware of that evolution, like it can feel like you've lost yourself. This is, wow, I've just, it can feel like you've lost yourself. So anyway, we tend to focus on the human doing because it's easier. It also is like what society asks of us. And in us like running and doing and running and doing, it's really hard to pause and focus on like who we are and do that boundaries work that kind of protects who we are, as well as like helps us develop. So understanding like when something is a wall versus when it's a gate that can open and close in our lives. And so, yeah, this is why when I say like the question, how are you, can feel like a lot if someone hasn't done that, like that being work. This is why.
Yeah. Well, and also for folks who haven't done that, why that question can be so superficial, right? Why that question goes from a normal contract of societal interaction versus a moment to genuinely connect and have that intimacy and familiarity with someone. And it's so interesting as you show up for that question to your point, like, are you human doing and going through the motions of asking the questions, how are you? Are you human being? To see this as an opportunity to see someone and hopefully in turn be seen, although that shouldn't be the crux of why you're asking, how are you? So this is going to ask it to you back. But we've all experienced that person who is asking, how are you? So that they can have you ask it to them in return.
That's right.
But I think that is also the second thing, as you were describing, you know, where we're at right now as a society. I'm going to also say, like, in the macro of what you're talking about, this context is everywhere. It's not just professional, it's not just personal, it's everywhere we go. And I have a fundamental belief that if we all just spent more time seeing one another, like genuinely seeing one another and spending time to recognize the light in one another, we will all be in a much better, deeper place of understanding of one another. And in turn, the respect that we can pay to one another with our, our commercial decisions, with our political decisions, but also we'll still continue to have a deeper connection to ourselves at the end of the day. And the question, how are you, is just the act of seeing and choosing to be seen in that moment. Did I get it? Did I get it?
You did.
Okay, great.
Beautifully said.
I love it. Well, if folks want to spend more time with you, because your ideas, you're just teeming with incredibly poignant and potent ideas. So folks want to spend time hanging out with you and just talking about this really, really enlivening and enriching stuff. How can they find you?
Yeah. So you can find me a few places. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So Alexandria Skeete, last name is Skeete. My website is alexandriatherese.com. So that's Teresa with an H, Theresa. And that is also where you can find the book on my website. It's also, I don't know if I can say, available at Loop and Tie, which I'm sure you can share more about, and also available on Amazon.
Amazing. Yeah. So go to Amazon. We'll drop the links in the show notes below so folks can just go straight to their Amazon shopping cart, or, hopefully they can find it in a retail store too and support some local businesses as well. We'll get you that mass distribution. I just want to end on one question that I think is really important for you is, how are you?
Okay, I am feeling amazing. My cup is full. I love having conversations like this with people like you who get it, who really understand humanity and are looking to deepen understanding and connecting with others. So I'm feeling so full. I would like to ask you a different question, if that's okay.
Please.
I want to know what's one thing you're looking forward to this week.
Well, like 30 minutes ago, it would have been this conversation because I was so eager to talk with you about this topic. We have so much to say and so many similarities that it's really refreshing to have those conversations. I'm also looking really forward to later on this week, my wife and I are going to a yoga and a Reiki class together Wednesday night. At the time of this recording, Wednesday night is the January 29th. It's a time where a lot of folks are gathering in spaces to feel connected to one another, but also to show up in protest for all of the rising tensions that are happening here in the U.S. And so it's a time and a space that I'm really excited to share with my wife in communion with, our spirituality, with our local community here in our small little town of Rhode Island, but also to be able to share more of that strength and that power from afar with folks who are gathering in those spaces in solidarity for me, for my rights, for you, for your rights, and for all of us and our rights as well too. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you for the work that you're doing, and sending you all of the love and light as you continue to do the work.
Likewise. Can't wait to touch base with you again soon and hear more about how you're doing and what you're up to.
Thank you, MK. Until next time.
Next time.